Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. David Sarwer. I'm the Associate Dean for Research in the College of Public Health, and I'm also a professor in our Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences. And it's my great pleasure to invite you to one of our signature events for National Public Health Week, which is going to be a panel discussion focused on the lessons from the pursuit of meaningful advocacy, which I think is going to be a really stimulating and interesting discussion about issues of gun violence in Philadelphia, and also the perhaps not just gun violence, but really kind of the issues around advocacy of what are we seeing in our communities and throughout the city in terms of the groups of individuals in our community, in our health systems, who are working to improve the lives and enhance the lives of people who are victims of gun violence. An issue that we clearly are hearing way too much about in our city and in our country over the last several years. As a bit of background, as somebody who does a lot of his work in the areas of obesity, it's not an area that has always been front and center on my radar. But one of the
No,
great
I'm all
joys
right.
of being
I
in a
was on the
college of
phone.
public health has been the opportunity to learn from my colleagues who work in areas like this. And I know that as I'm at the point in my life that I'm at, I'm much more aware of things like the Mom's Demand initiative with regards to gun violence and safety, and read the Fred Guttenberg's book earlier this summer called Find the Helpers. Many of you may know he's a father of one of the high school students who was a victim of gun violence in Florida several years ago. And perhaps it's being a father myself, perhaps it's just my station in life. It's something that is definitely much more front and center for me. And so as we planned our events for this week, along with the planning committee, Louisa Clem, Jackie Spitzer, and others, we were really thrilled at the opportunity to work with Scott Charles and others to bring this event to you tonight. So one of my jobs tonight is to make my remarks short and sweet and to turn things over to our panelists. And we have four panelists with us this evening. I'm going to very, very briefly introduce them to you, but then really turn things over to them and let them tell you more about themselves. But I think as you'll see quickly, we're going to have a very wide-ranging perspective on how we look at these issues of gun violence and advocacy in the city of Philadelphia. So Jalil Frazier, who's going to be our first person to speak, is a founding member of A Wheel Family, which is a support group for paralyzed gunshot survivors, which was formed in 2019. We're also going to be joined by Helen Ubiñas, who's an award-winning columnist from the Philadelphia Inquirer and the Philadelphia Daily News. I've actually was reading one of her articles over the weekend. We're also joined by Scott Charles, who is the trauma outreach manager for Temple University Hospital, where he directs the institution's violence prevention and interventions program, including Cradle to Grave, which educates young people about the medical realities of gun violence, as well as several other programs. And then finally, last but not least, Melanie Nelson is the executive director of Northwest Victim Services, where she's devoted more than 25 years of her life going back to high school to working in this area. So with that, I'm going to invite you to sit back, relax, hear a little bit, and learn from our panelists. If you have any questions for us tonight, please put them in the question and answer feature. I will then moderate that discussion starting in about 45 minutes from now. So with that, Jalil, I'm going to turn things over to you. Do you want to introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about yourself and what we can learn from you?
My name is Jalil Frazier. I was shot in a barbershop robbery, 2018. What left me now, I'm paralyzed. I'm a paraplegic. Got two kids. They're terrible. And whatever you want to know, I'll tell you.
Well, Jalil, can you tell us a little bit about, as much as you're comfortable, about how you met Scott and kind of, after the shooting, how you've gotten to the place that you're at and the work that you do with the Wheel family?
I met these people right here by accident. These people wouldn't leave me alone. I'm gonna be honest. These people wouldn't leave me alone. They turned out to be good people though. The Will family, it kind of got created because I needed to find more people like me. And like, a lot of people don't share your story or how you live your daily lives. And I felt like my goal is still not fulfilled because people still keep secrets. So it's still a lot of more work to do. It's more, it's like I got crazy plans and ideas. I just, being in a wheelchair is hard. It's hard. And I don't think these people really understand. Like, you got to show these people, like, I'm to the point now that I want these people to come with me and just follow me and come help me to see how these everyday situations is. Like the accessibility of everything. It's not really wheelchair accessible. You really gotta learn how to get there and get up there and climb there. Like, if you don't know how to do none of that, you're not gonna survive and you're gonna stay in the house. I came home, I thought I was gonna have all this assistance and all that, and none of that happened. So I had to learn how to pop a woolly, gotta learn how to crawl, gotta learn how to climb, you gotta learn how to say thank you. You gotta tell these people thank you because these people don't gotta help you. You gotta learn how to just appreciate it. Like it's crazy. Like, I feel like I could write a book. Like, honestly.
So, well, and I suspect that you probably could, because I think you're right that, these are stories and these are things that persons who have never been in a wheelchair have never thought about and considered. So Jalil, just to stay with that for a moment, when you in the years that you've kind of adapted to this, have you Jalil, did we lose you there?
No, I'm listening.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Your screen got very still. I thought maybe the screen froze on it.
Oh, I know how to stay still. That's all.
Gotcha. So have you? I assume you've gotten better with things like getting yourself in and out of bed, getting yourself in and out, in your home. Is it to the point that the hard part now is kind of going out in public, whether it's going down the sidewalk or getting in a car or going to a gym or something like that?
No, the hard part is never going to be over. Like, you just learn how to do it, but it's not going to get easy. Like, the hard part for me is acceptance. Like, I know that I'm in this wheelchair, but I didn't accept that I'm in this wheelchair. It's still things that I want to do that I can't do, and it makes me angry. But I don't say nothing. I just, do whatever you can do and go about your business. But being out here in this world is another hard task to do. More so because people don't know how to help you, and they don't even know I don't know where it started, but these people don't know how to help you because they don't even know what type of person you is. They don't know if they're gonna get cursed out. They don't know if you nice, you mean, or you angry, because they watch the news and they see everybody as a piece of work. Then they look at you and they don't even know how to judge you. So there's probably a lot of people that want to help, but they don't even know how to, come to you and say anything because they don't know if you're a butthead or not. So they just keep on walking.
Yeah.
I met this man in the dollar store, man. This is an older man. He like 76 years old. He stared at me for 10 minutes. And you know what he said to me? He said, I want to help you for that 10 minutes I was staring at you, but I didn't know if you was going to curse me out or not. And I said, damn, that's crazy. He said, the world is crazy. I said, it is. But the time that he probably wanted to help me is when I needed help. And he didn't even help me because he didn't even know how to help me. All I needed somebody to do was hold the door open. But he didn't even want to do that because he didn't know what I was going to say to him. And that right
So,
there just made me think about it. Like, it's crazy.
so if you wrote that book that you mentioned, would you tell people that you'd want other people in your neighborhood, other people in the general public to offer help? Or do you think it's that people need to learn how to respond to you when you ask for help?
I wouldn't, I don't know. If I write that book, it's more so about helping everybody like me, not just me. It's learning how to deal with somebody this situation is like bigger than me. I see so many people like me and I be trying to help them and I'm like, yo, you gotta tell your story or gotta reach out to somebody. Like this is bigger than everything. People don't
Mhm.
even know about all these young guys in the wheelchair or whatever. And I don't even know how to get it out there. Like I'm ready to get on the news and tell people like it's really a lot of disabled people that got shot. Like we
Mhm.
didn't have no surgery. We didn't have a messed up surgery, none of that. Like we got paralyzed from a bullet. Like
Uh-huh.
it's so many people, it's so many young guys that just stay in the house because they don't want to come outside. And I be trying to tell them like, yo, you ready? I could get my grandma to come get you. Like my grandma be like, you want me to go get somebody? Like my grandma's 73 years old. She be trying to help. Like, it's like, I don't know, man. I just feel like gotta help, we gotta help these people.
Mhm. So
I
is
don't know
that what
how to
you're
help these
trying,
people.
is that what you're trying to do with a Wheel family?
But it's not gonna work that way because a lot of people they don't like to meet new people. And like it's a real problem with like guys meeting new guys. Like they got this thing with them like they don't want nobody to judge them or whatever.
Mhm.
Like before I was like that, but now I'm like, man, I don't give a damn. I'll tell you my story. What you want to know? Like if you don't feel comfortable around me, you know, you don't gotta be here.
Mhm.
But you
So,
gotta get
so
to that point.
So Jalil, given that we've got some of our students at Temple in the audience, what would you want them to know? Because some of them are going into professions that you've probably worked with. So they're training to be physical therapists, they're training to be occupational therapists and recreational therapists, who are sometimes the professionals who help people who suffer injuries or suffer gun violence return back to their lives at home. What from your perspective would you want them to know?
What I want them to know is don't just help people because it's your job. Like help people because it's from your heart. Like if it's
Mhm.
not from your heart, we're not gonna want the assistance. We're not gonna want none of that. A lot of
Okay.
people do stuff for you. They want credit for it. They
Mhm.
want you to acknowledge that that person helps you or whatever.
Mhm.
That's why a lot of us be like, oh no, we don't want no help. But if you're doing it from your heart, then a lot of people will let you help them and give them assistance and everything. Like everybody, like a lot of people do stuff because they want something. You know what I mean? So I would tell them that's your profession, but make sure it's coming from your heart too, because they're still going to deny the help.
Mhm.
Like you getting paid, but you should do it still because that's what you want to do.
Mhm.
And you got to learn how to, you know, meet new people that's disabled. You got to know what to say or whatever. If it was me, I ain't gonna lie. I walk up, I just start my conversation is, "How you doing?" Then after that, you know, some people will just tell you what they need or whatever. But
Mhm.
that whole just staring and all that, that's not gonna work.
Yeah.
That ain't gonna work out.
So Jaleel, before I turn things over to Helen to get her perspective on this, I have a kind of a practical question for you. You know, you were talking about that story of the guy who was staring at you in the convenience store. So let's imagine for a moment that you and I are in that convenience store and I walk down an aisle and I see you in your chair and you're reaching to grab something that's just out of reach. And I happen to see you struggling to reach it. What would you want me to do as somebody who's never met you before? Would you want me to offer to get that for you? Or would you want me to ask if you need help? Or what would be your expectation of what you'd want
Honestly,
from somebody?
honestly, at this point, if I see you and you right next to me and I need help, I'm gonna ask you, excuse me, can you help me real fast?
Uh-huh.
If you can't do it, you can't do it.
Mhm.
Like, I'm not gonna expect you to do anything. Like, you're not supposed to expect anybody to do anything.
Right.
But if you next to me and I can't get it, I'm gonna be like, excuse me, can you help me real fast? Like, that's up to
Mhm.
you if you don't want to help me. But that just should be like with anything. Like, everybody need help.
Right. So if I
Some
offer,
kind of way.
you're not, if I offer, you're not going to get frustrated, you're not going to get angry with me, you're going to appreciate that help.
Not gonna appreciate it. But if I can do it, then I'm gonna say no thank you, I'm all right. But like
Okay.
if I need help, I'm not gonna deny the help. I'm not a
Okay.
butthead.
Great. Well, Jalil, I'm going to turn things over to Helen because I want to get her perspective. But obviously, I want you to stay engaged because I suspect that our students are going to have a lot of questions for you as we get towards the end of our time together. So Helen, can you give us a little bit of your perspective as a journalist who, has worked for the major newspapers in town, who's obviously been in Philadelphia, and I also think, a little bit as Jalil alluded to, my sense is from learning a bit about you that this is also a very personal issue for you and something you feel very passionate about. But can you share with all of us your perspective on where we're at with advocacy and gun violence right now?
Sure. But just to, if you don't mind, I can't wait to tell you about sort of how I got involved. And I'm part of a long line of people who would not leave Jalil alone, just like he said. But I came into this way after Scott. And so I think we should probably start there, and I'll jump in after if you don't mind, because I don't want to sort of like jump the line.
Oh, okay. No problem.
I'm all about rules. All about rules. I'm like, oh my God, I'm not up yet. Yeah.
This is one of the first times that Helen is actually going to let me talk and encourage me to talk before her. So
I am timing you, however. So
I'm going to take this opportunity to get a word in edgewise.
Yeah.
Hey, Jalil, are you still there, man? Can you hear me?
I'm listening.
No, I just want to make sure, brother. Are you okay with me sharing kind of, sharing when we met and my experience of it?
You can say whatever you want.
All right. I'm gonna tell you your deepest, darkest secrets. So first of all, thank you, David, and thank you for inviting me to do this. It's such an important thing. And more than anything, I enjoy getting to spend time with these folks who have become friends and allies, and any chance I can get to hang out with Jalil really is a good time. I've been at Temple for about 16 years, and I ended up at Temple after meeting Dr. Amy Goldberg, who at the time was the chief trauma surgeon. And I was working with a group of kids on a project around gun violence. And somebody suggested that I reach out to this dynamic character at the hospital. I didn't know what that meant. I brought some kids up to the hospital. She was blown away by the experience of talking to young people who were able to ask her questions as learners rather than patients, because that was so often the way she was encountering them. And for her, this was really a story of advocacy. For her, this is her wanting to go beyond just kind of the typical role of a surgeon, and thinking about ways to try to, stem the flow of young lives that were being lost in the trauma bay. She would call me night after night after we had met, and would try to steal me away from my previous employer. And she ultimately did that because after spending weeks of calling my house after she had a gunshot patient die, a young gunshot patient, I figured in the interest of saving my marriage, I would go ahead and join her efforts so that she would stop calling me at 1 o'clock in the morning to talk about how frustrating it is. I figure in the time that I've been at Temple working on violence prevention efforts and intervention efforts, we've probably seen more than 8,000 shooting victims treated at the hospital. We treat more shooting victims than any other hospital in the entire Commonwealth. And that's a remarkable statement in a city that has so many level 1 trauma centers, including, our friends over in West Philly and up in Albany. But, we see so many, and the carnage is unrelenting. If I hadn't, if I'd been in a cave yesterday, I would have been able to tell you that the temperatures had risen based alone on the number of gunshot victims we had just yesterday. And it has gone on unabated, including until just about an hour ago. I think it's hard for people to understand the challenges that working in the gun violence space presents when you're talking about a city where, I calculate that in the lifetime of your typical high school freshman, 22,000 Philadelphians have been shot. And that is an astonishing number. And the thing that I try to remind people is that as a city, we save about 80% of shooting victims. So that, my math is terrible, so don't, I went to public school, but I estimate that's probably, in the lifetime of your typical high school freshman, that's about 18,000 people, I guess, that survived being shot that are out there in the world. When we think about the level of commitment that it would take to try to undo some of the harm that has been done by gun victimization, you can imagine how many hands on deck it would take just to help one person. But now we're talking about 22,000 people, and this really becomes a question of capacity, and it's a matter of trying to scale up when we just don't have the resources. When I remember when Jalil came into the hospital, it was prior to us. We today have a program where we have victim advocates who are embedded in the hospital 24/7. So regardless of whether you get shot at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or you get shot at 2 o'clock in the morning, we have victim advocates who are there to help with the actual patient, their family members. We make phone calls. We, to the families to let them know that their loved one has been shot. We, greet them in the parking lot and walk them into the hospital and put them in a family waiting room. Everything. We wrap our arms around as much of this family and as much of these issues as we can. But we didn't necessarily have that when we were really kind of a fledgling effort at the time when Jalil was first injured. But I'm taken back to, I believe it was January 2018. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jalil, because my brain is mush, but I believe it was January of 2018.
Yes.
Yeah. And so what I recall is reading about Jalil, probably after I first encountered him in the hospital. I first saw him in our ICU. And it took me a moment to put together that he was the young man that I had read about who had heroically, interceded in a robbery attempt at a barbershop. And he was being hailed as a hero in the local media, rightfully so. There were children in a barbershop. There was an attempt to rob it with children present, and he stood up to protect children. And ultimately, he was shot, nearly lost his life, and ultimately lost his mobility. The frustrating thing for somebody who works in a hospital, as I do, who sees patients like Jalil, is you realize that long after the headlines kind of go away, he still continues to struggle on. And this is a city where, as was the case last night, or I believe it was last night, it's all blurring, but somebody got shot at 3rd in Chestnut, and there's an inordinate amount of attention that's being paid to that shooting because it's occurred outside of socially accepted zip codes. The shelf life on a story like Jalil's is much shorter, and there wasn't a ton of attention beyond those first headlines, and yet I would pass his room frequently throughout the day, and I'd see him in there. And I was aware of the level of injury that he had, and we weren't sure whether or not he was ever going to wake up. Against all odds, he woke up and was all there. And that was one of the things that the bittersweet part of it is you knew that he was going to have to confront the challenges that were presented by a spinal cord injury. One of the things that I remember most vividly, and I know he doesn't remember this, but when we knew that he was going to be okay, and that the Jalil that was in there was starting to emerge, he didn't talk to just anybody who went in there. And as Jalil is proud, and he's strong-willed, He wouldn't just talk to anybody because you were talking to him. And he was understandably frustrated. But I remember he had a nurse who would push him and annoy him and try to get him to engage. And Jalil's significant other was in the room at this point. And the nurse said to Jalil, "Blow me a kiss." And he blew her a kiss. And I thought, oh my God, this is, here he survived a shooting and now he's gonna have to survive a beating. And I looked at Tamara and I said, you know, she's probably, the nurse is just, you know, I was terrified. I was like, oh my God. And his lady said at the time, "That's perfectly all right. I want as many kisses as he wants to blow. I'm here for it." You know, she really wanted him to succeed, and he had a tremendous network. But I also was aware of the fact that when we discharged him, he was going to go to a spinal cord rehab center. They were going to push him. He was going to, do all of the physical things that were required to get him on the path to recovery, but that there wasn't probably going to be a ton on the, on the other end waiting for him. So I reached out to Melanie Nelson, who I'm going to let talk in a little bit. By the way, it may be premature, but Melanie is an amazing advocate who is being recognized. I'm probably not supposed to share this, but she is being recognized in her field as being exceptional among her peers on a national level, and she can talk a little bit more about that. But Melanie was part of a collaborative we created at Temple. We looked at all of the victim service agencies that were in our area to really ask ourselves, how could we do a better job of serving our patients? We knew that there were victim agencies out there. We knew we were able to engage them in kind of an ad hoc piecemeal manner. But I reached out to one that I'd worked with a lot at the time, Jonathan Davis, who at the time was with an organization called North Central Victim Services, and just asked, how can we do more? How do we reach more patients? How do we refer more victims of crime to you? I knew that he had a friendly relationship with other agencies. And at that time, he said, I think I can bring them all to the table, and I laughed because it was like bringing the crime families together. Not that they were crime families, they were crime victim agency families, but they were all willing to hang their egos at the door. These organizations that had worked semi-competitively in the sense that, their funding is tough. And in the interest of all the patients, they were willing to come together, and all the agencies have kind of a different complement of resources that they can bring to bear. And we just said, what if we, instead of working in silos and trying to divide up this pie, what if we just grew this pie? And what if we brought all these sources to bear and help more patients? And that's exactly what ended up happening. I will tell you that Melanie is somebody that who will call me on a Saturday morning or text me on a Saturday morning at 7:30 in the morning, because she realized that, she saw the news, or she was given a report that some shooting victims were brought to Temple. And she immediately wants to know, how can she get in contact with the family? What do they need? How can she help? And that was the case when it came to Jalil. I knew that I wanted to put him in, I was happy to put him in her hands, because I knew that she was going to be able to provide the kind of intensive support that that he would need. And again, this is not a perfect system, as Jalil has expressed. There's lots of room for improvement. But I knew that given what she had at her disposal and her commitment, she was going to do everything that she could. So I'm going to give her, I've been yammering, I'm going to give her a chance to kind of talk about what it was like to begin working with Jalil once we made the referral to her.
Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you for having me. I truly, truly appreciate it. And yes, I am one of those people that would not leave Jalil alone, because this is not a job for me. This is a passion, and I love what I do. So Northwest Victim Services, we help victims and witnesses and community members of crime, affected by crime, within the Northwest section of Philadelphia, and all of our services are free. So Northwest Victim Services is actually the very first community-based agency created and dedicated to helping victims and witnesses of crime in the city of Philadelphia. It went so well, 6 other agencies were born. So we all run off of police districts. So Northwest works very closely with the 14th, 35th, 39th, and the 5th police districts. We help with unpaid medical bills, lost time from work, funeral expenses, counseling, relocation, mileage, and we actually go to court with our victims as well. And we offer therapy. Again, all services are free. I had the honor of meeting Jalil in February of 2018. So it was just amazing that I was able to serve someone who actually did something good and his life was changed forever. So I wanted to meet this young man who the news was talking about. So I knew when Jalil got home, his journey would not be easy. And we are not a one and done agency. And I told Jalil and I told his wifey that I would be in their life for as long as they would allow me to be. So when Jalil got home, he realized he had a wheelchair, but he wanted to go outside and be able to, when his kids were walking to the corner store or walking down the street or when they were walking to school, he needed a motorized wheelchair. So I was able to connect with another resource, and we were able to deliver Jalil a motorized wheelchair May 18th, 2018, and we took it to his house. In 2018, in December, I took toys to his house and had them all wrapped up so they would have a great Christmas. Because again, this affected Jalil, it affected his wife, it affected the family in so many ways. But this is going above and beyond the services that we normally offer. I was able to file a claim for Jalil through the Victims Compensation Program. And he was employed at the time of the incident, but his job did not pay him for his missed time for work. So I was able to file a claim for him through the Victims Compensation Program. And Jalil was able to recoup $15,000 from the lost wages. We had an amazing fundraiser on May 9th, 2019. And we honored Jalil as the community hero. And Jalil was just on my TV show, The Power of One, on September 29th, 2020. And I wanted him to be able to tell the story. I don't want people to forget about the shooting victims in the city of Philadelphia. And I do not want them to forget about Jalil. It has been a true pleasure for me to serve Jalil, a community hero, in my book. Jalil is a gift to the world, and I will not let others forget about his unselfish acts of kindness. So I love Jalil, and I will keep bugging him every day, and anything that he needs. And if I can move a mountain for him to help him, I will definitely do that.
Boy, what a gift that you bring to the people that you serve with that attitude and that approach. I mean, we all should be so fortunate when we fall on tough times to have somebody who's willing to advocate the way that you have. And, you know, Melanie, in listening to you and to Scott, you know, you both kind of talked about the important role that you and your organizations play in terms of being a safety net, because it's hard for me not to kind of think about the people, as you said, who oftentimes can fall through the cracks and don't have, you know, they get the wonderful care while they're in the hospital, they get the wonderful care while they're in the rehab facility, and that even though they may get, you know, very comprehensive discharge planning and they might get certain resources, I think as you just articulated with Jalil, it's not until you get home that you might realize what you really need. That, you know, if you got young kids, you need a motorized wheelchair, because otherwise you're not going to be able to get down to the corner store because the sidewalks are not going to be conducive to having a non-motorized wheelchair. Or, you know, if you've got a child who's engaged in activities in the park and you want to go see them. And do both of you have a sense of the number of victims of gun violence who don't get kind of caught in the advocacy group safety net that you've created?
You said that don't?
Yeah.
They do not, but yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, Scott, the numbers, as you said, are staggering when we think about a 14, 15-year period than the number of victims of gun violence in the city. It's just, and I think it's the psychologist in me coming out when thinking about, those who fall through the cracks and worrying about how without that attention, without that support, they could end up going into their homes and essentially never coming back out. They live. Yeah.
Okay. So for me, with the 5th, 14th, 35th, and 39th police districts, every day I receive reports of all of the crimes that have occurred the day before. So my advocates are mailing them information. And I took it a step further. Not only are they mailing them information, I'll get the police reports and their numbers are on the police report, so I will contact them. But the beautiful part about the Temple collaboration is that not only do I have the reports from the police department, I have these advocates at Temple 24 hours a day. So with this beautiful collaboration, we are able to serve victims in less than 24 hours of their victimization. So for the Northwest section of Philadelphia, I'm trying to do everything that I can so no one slips through the cracks. But this beautiful collaboration that we have with Temple and with the Philadelphia Police Department, and then we also have a great collaboration with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. We try to cover all bases so no victim, witnesses, and even community members go unserved.
It's really remarkable if you think about it. You think about all that goes into trauma-based care, all of the medical, Scott, as you alluded to, all the things that have to be done to save a life. And yet you all are jumping in that quickly to try to provide that support as immediately as possible. So I guess one question, Melanie and Scott, for both of you, are when you approach a family within that first 24 hours, are some of them kind of still so close to what happened that they really don't know what to make of your offers of support, and don't, they're almost not even there yet mentally, imagining what they're going to need weeks and months ahead of time?
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I want to, I want to also circle back to something Melanie said. I think that we should be clear that not all victim agencies are created equal. There are different levels of commitment, I think, and capacity. And Melanie is often, to be quite honest, one of the people that we think of as a go-to, where if we feel that this person has really kind of a litany of needs and incredible, demands, we'll go to Melanie just because we know that she's going to be on it, like a dog on a bone, so to speak. And so, I want to make sure that we're clear that we make referrals and agencies will accept referrals, but what happens after that often depends on the agency. And some agencies are going to do more and some are going to do less. And so I don't mean to be a cynic, but what ends up happening, I think, we're in one corner of Philadelphia, but even within our collaborative, I think that there are just going to be some patients who are going to get more services and take advantage of those services for a longer period of time. And there are going to be some who, quite honestly, will receive the kind of bare minimum, the information, the recovery of lost wages, and that's going to be that. So I think it's kind of all over the map. And I think that there's so much more work that we have to do to try to bring agencies up, to a higher level, to a higher baseline, so that we are meeting more patients' needs. But we have to be clear that when we talk about somebody like Jalil, we're talking about the challenges of trying to make him whole again, which is something that I think he'll be the first one to say that, like, he didn't sign up for this. And this is a long, involved process. And so, this is the challenge that's before us. One of the things that's staggering about this issue, and I've answered everything except the question you asked me, David, but I promise I'll get to it. But one of the things I want to point out when it comes to where we are as a city, one of the things that people don't realize is that in Philadelphia, about 1 in 7 shooting victims end up experiencing paralysis. different levels of paralysis, but they have some encounter with paralysis. So if we just committed our resources to focusing on just paralyzed patients, that'd be a full-time job. And we realize that even with the resources that we do provide, we're barely scratching the surface. To go back to your original question, David, we do a pretty good job of trying to capture, that's a terrible term, but to try to enroll as many patients as we can and refer as many patients as we can, especially those who get admitted to the hospital. But you're right, we do have patients when we first approach them who this is so brand new that, we want to make sure, the first thing we do is just make sure that they are aware that we're a resource that's available to them. And sometimes they don't want it. They don't want the help right then. But we stay in touch. We see them again in clinic. We reach out periodically just to follow up. And it's during those follow-ups that we do ultimately get them to take advantage, even if it's not during the first 24 hours. I would guess, Melanie's an outlier because she's going to touch virtually every patient we send her way. But I would guess that, a conservative estimation is that we're probably referring 80% of all the patients within that initial period of time. And then, again, some of those patients are going to fall off at some point with some of them. They thought they wanted help, and then they get to a place where they want to be left alone. But we need to do a better job of tracking how many patients continue to remain engaged with our agencies.
Now with Northwest, and they are so appreciative of the services, and the co-homicide survivors are running on autopilot. So they are so grateful. I will say, listen, I received your information from one of the advocates at Temple. That puts their mind at ease, that this is not somebody, say, from the media who wants to just get a story. No offense, Helen, not being smart. So it puts their mind at ease. And when I speak to them, they don't know what to do next. So I'll put them in contact with the medical examiner's office. I'll ask them if they have the detective's information so they can contact the detective. Did your loved one have belongings? Are they at Temple? Are they at the medical examiner's office? And did your loved one have life insurance? And if they didn't, then I can actually put them in contact with some funeral directors that I know are very empathetic, that's not the first thing that they're going to ask for is the money. They know that I'm going to file a claim through the Victims Compensation Program, and they'll get their money on the back end. So a lot of victims are running on autopilot when they are victimized. And that's what I do for them. I try to take the legwork out of everything. Contact me. Every victim has my cell phone. So I tell them they're never a bother. They can contact me directly, and then I'll try to help them in any way that I can.
And that's so wonderful to hear, Melanie, because I think you're absolutely right that, when we think about, the first time any of us has to deal with the death of a relative, there's that element of what do I do? And, how do I have a conversation with a funeral director? How do I do this? How do I do that? How do I put the pieces, how do I put the puzzle pieces of that person's part of our lives back together again and understand kind of where the pause button got hit? And to have somebody like you and your colleagues kind of be that shepherd, if you will, to help us really, help people really understand this and understand that, okay, I want to have an appropriate burial, but, we don't have the life insurance benefit, or I don't know how much it is. And, how do we do that? And how do we make sure we're not going to go somewhere where somebody's going to take advantage of us or make us feel less than, or any of those kinds of things? So, it's wonderful to hear. And I think I got a sense of this from Scott as we've been planning this over the last couple of months, that the scope of everything that you all do, which is really remarkable. And I think that's one of the untold stories here, that as I've gotten to know Scott and the work that's been going on up at Temple University Hospital, is not even knowing, and I'm somewhat embarrassed to say this, not even knowing that these resources were there. And it's so wonderful and inspiring to hear that they are, given the scope of the problem. So with that, I want to turn things over to you, Helen, and get a little bit of your perspective on this. Melanie's talked a little bit about sections of the city and police precincts and so forth, but I suspect you also have that larger citywide view as well. So what can you share with us before we open things up to our question and answer session?
Sure, thanks very much. I'm not, I don't want to sound cynical or negative. That's what you say, Robert, before you sound cynical and negative. So here we go. But having Scott and Melanie on your team is the best case scenario, right? So having these two incredible advocates is exactly what you want to happen. Unfortunately, that's not the reality for many, many people who are dealing with gun violence in the city. And so there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who are falling through the crack. We're talking about, people who have been intimately affected by gun violence, who've been shot and paralyzed, or shot and seriously wounded, or the sort of the extended sort of realm of the trauma, the families, the mothers, the significant others, the children, the communities dealing with all of this trauma. And as the numbers increase, as we're seeing, the cracks get bigger and more people fall through. And you can, and again, you have a Scott, you have a Melanie who are doing as much as they can with what they have. There are not enough resources in this city, whether we're talking about resources in hospitals or nonprofits or organizations. There just isn't, to meet the needs of so many people. And again, we're talking about an increasing community. Where I sort of jump in often is, when people or when someone has fallen through the cracks, or when they haven't fallen through the cracks, perhaps they need a little more help. And that's sort of how I got involved when it came to Jalil. He had Melanie and he had Scott. But the reality was that he was going back home to a row home, that was super narrow. I met him, I believe it was in May, so a few months after he was shot and paralyzed. I remember going to the door. I remember reading, we talk a lot about the stories that were in the news about him, but they were very short stories about hero guy, does this amazing thing, all legit. And then there was no and then what? And in my column, I try not to just write a column, but I try to sort of build a community. And I'm not very interested in just sort of one and done stories. I want to tell the people, I want to tell my community, hey, this is what happened to this guy or to this woman. This is where we can help. This is where we can elevate this story, because Jalil's not the only person who's gone through this. Way before this horrible thing happened to him, there were other people that I've written about. And way after, there's a bazillion other people who are going through this. And so the reason why I thought Jalil's story was so important to tell, why when his significant other greeted me at the door and said, today's not a good day, I'm like, oh, well, okay, I see him right in there. Can I just talk to him for 1 second, because I knew there was an important, it wasn't just a story, but there was something important to tell the community, that there was a whole generation of gunshot victims who were not shot and lived, who weren't shot and died, but who were shot and were in dire need of help. And so he, his story sort of represented the story of so many other people who were dealing with this in the community, and who frankly did not have a Scott and did not have a Melanie, and were unsure of what to do with themselves, and were unsure of how to help them. And I wasn't sure how to do it, but I knew that I could start by telling his story and pointing out that there was a whole community of people who needed this help. And that's sort of what I did, because I kept coming back and I kept telling his story. So it was at first the story of how he was shot and paralyzed and what he had, the heroic thing he had done, but also the reality that he came home to. He was in a hospital bed in his dining room, if I'm remembering correctly, and his family was upstairs. He couldn't get around. He wasn't sure, what his life was going to look like. And Jalil, if I'm misspeaking, just jump in and tell me you have no idea what you're talking about. But that was sort of my recollection. But I, kept coming back to sort of not just tell his story, but tell the story of limited resources for a community that we already, neglect and ignore, and that was only growing. And so that's sort of my role, is to sort of take what the advocates have done and sort of highlight that, so that the community is aware of not only what is happening, but what needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. So Helen, I have a somewhat lighthearted question and a more serious one. I'll start with the lighthearted one. So did you get in the door that day or no?
Oh yeah, I mean, come on, yeah. I've been doing this for a long time. Yeah. I mean, and it's not just because it is, you know, and I know that, you know, you didn't mean anything by it. Love you, Melanie. But a lot of people view the media like, oh, they're out for a story. The reason why I push as hard as I push, not to just get through his door, but to tell these stories, is because they have to be told, because they represent so many other people. Because if not, many of us get to close our door and decide that that has nothing to do with me. Those are not my neighbors. Those are not my kids. Those are not my problems. When in reality, it's all of our problems, because we live in this, right. So yeah, it's not just about pushing my way into a door to get a story, but pushing my way in a door to hopefully make some sort of difference or change in somebody's life.
Well, I think also what you said was very telling, that you're right. You could write a story, unfortunately, every day, if not multiple times a day, about the most recent victim of gun violence in the city. But after a while, unfortunately, I think we all get a little immune to that. It doesn't resonate with us. And yet it's the part of the story, both before the shooting and the story of that person's life, but then also all of the challenges that we're dealing with, you know, we're talking about here, whether we're talking about tangible support, such as, you know, back wages because of time lost in the hospital, or the need for a wheelchair, or the need for a hospital bed that needs to go in the dining room over a short period of time, versus also longer term rehabilitation, whether we're talking about physical rehabilitation, whether we're talking about mental health issues related to the trauma. I mean, those are all long-term issues that oftentimes get lost. We actually have two of our researchers in the college who do a lot of work with subparalysis spinal cord injuries. So these are individuals who suffer a spinal cord injury but are not paralyzed, but still struggle with having the strength and mobility to get through their days the way that they previously could. And in one of their big challenges, as we've learned, is they oftentimes cannot get to physical therapy because their physical strength is just weak enough that they get fatigued, you know, getting to paratransit, or they cancel appointments and so forth. And yet we know that even if you try to provide that therapy to them remotely, it's not as effective as in person. And so how do we help those patients long-term? We've got to figure out a way to get them to engage in their treatment over long periods of time, which is obviously a challenge for this population as well. So here comes the challenging question. Scott made the reference to the shooting at 3rd and Chestnut, and the reference of that shootings that take place in certain zip codes, if I remember this correctly, obviously maybe have a longer shelf life in the media than those who take place in other zip codes. How do you wrestle with that issue? Is that just an unfortunate byproduct of the way we consume media? How do you make peace with that? Do you feel like your approach to the way you write about this is trying to not just tell the story that's the lead news on the 11 o'clock, you know, news for 3 nights in a row, but tell the other stories that get lost in the shuffle?
Yeah, I mean, I make peace with it by not making peace with it, if that makes sense, because, you know, I can only sort of, I would be lying if I said that as a member of the media that more attention in many newsrooms aren't given to, as Scott said, you know, incidents that happen in zip codes that, you know, I forget what you said. It was much more eloquent than my stammering, but you know, that is a reality. It's one that you know, legitimately we're talking about and wanting to do better, but I very much approach this as my individual responsibility to the community, my community, and who I choose to write about. And that means not chasing those stories, because I don't need to be another person standing on the corner telling a story everyone's telling. I need to be knocking on Jalil's door where no one's there saying, hey, let me in because I think I can help. You know, and of course there's a story there, a good story about something heroic that this person has done, but there's a larger story, right? That potentially can help more people. So I very much, you know, sort of approach it where I'm not here. I've been around long enough and I've written enough columns to know that a good story doesn't really make any change. One good story, no matter how good that story is, you have to just keep sort of telling these stories and sort of going back and trying to find different ways of telling these stories and trying to find different ways of getting these issues out there, which is why, I have this Fill the Steps event where I call people from, all over the city to the Art Museum steps to call attention to gun violence. I call it Fill the Steps. I have not once filled the steps, but maybe before I, die, we will, because the issue is like, anyone who's impacted by gun violence, come fill the steps. And if actually they came, we would fill those steps and then some. But I talk about that because there was one time when Jalil came and he was talking to me about, sort of struggling and wanting to meet people who were in his position. And I wanted to help because I knew he wasn't alone, because I have visited many young men, who are basically living in a renovated front porch because they can no longer make it inside their house because, they're in a wheelchair and nothing's accessible, and sort of speaks to the lack of, services available. So I knew he wasn't alone. So in my euphoria of like, hey, people actually showed up this time, I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but if this doesn't exist, I will try to help you make this happen. Mm-hmm. And I knew, and it sort of speaks to why we're all here and sort of this sort of journey, the journey of all of us sort of doing this kind of advocacy. I knew that the only way I could do this was if I turned to Scott and said, please help me. Jalil needs this, other people need this. The city needs a group like this, a support group for paralyzed gunshot victims. And we're just adding to those numbers every day. I get calls from people all the time, and I turned to him and he helped me have the first meeting in a basement room of Temple University Hospital. And it's been over a year that this group has existed. But it's sort of this this advocacy that, I turn to him, he turns to me, it's the only way I think to actually make a difference and to actually do sort of advocacy that works.
Mm-hmm. So with that, which beautifully brought us back to the main theme of our event tonight, which was the lessons that we've learned from advocacy, we've got a number of questions that have already popped up in the question and answer box. So for any of you listening, if you do have questions, now's a great time to add to the list. So I'm going to start going through those in the last half an hour that we have. So Jalil, this first question is actually from you. What is the one thing, Jalil, that you most need now that you maybe haven't gotten help with in the last couple of years? Housing. Okay. Is it more housing that is adapted for your needs, or housing in general?
Housing that's adapted for my needs.
Uh-huh. And Scott and Melanie, can you add a little bit to that? I mean, Melanie, does your agency work on issues around long-term housing, or?
So that's a major issue. And you think about Jalil, and his life has totally been turned upside down. Living in a row home, and now you're shot and you're paralyzed. So he needs a lift, to get up with his wheelchair, which costs a lot of money. So basically, Jalil needs his whole house to be remodeled.
Yeah.
That's not a resource that I actually have. And anybody who knows me knows that I will try to move a mountain for anybody. But that's hard. But with the great work of Helen and being able to write an article, and when she wrote that article, his wife was contacted by a whole lot of contractors for people to help. So Helen has this crazy following. Scott has a crazy following. So when you have two great people like that, and then they open that story up, that's when other people can help, the contractors, the people who build houses and things of that nature. So that's how that would come about, but that's major.
Yeah. I learned a couple of years ago before the pandemic, and I didn't know this, that a big part of what Habitat for Humanity does is not, we think about Habitat for Humanity and we assume it's a bunch of people on a Saturday building an entire house, but they actually have a branch of what they do where they will customize certain rooms for individuals with special needs. So for example, if you have an older parent who is living in a bathroom that's 40 years old and it's an old style bathtub and they can't get in and out any of the bathtub safely anymore, they will come in and they will remodel the bathroom to make it safer for that person to still live in the home. And you know, we at the college have started to have some conversations with them about particularly working on these issues with people with disability. And I believe much like their larger housing project, you have to apply for it. It's a challenge to get it through, but I wonder if that ultimately might be another avenue for them to explore as well. It was something I was completely unaware of.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think one of the things that we have to recognize is, you know, the challenges. As I said, you know, I'm hyper aware of the fact that when we get on calls like this and we talk about this advocacy, it feels like we're kind of patting ourselves on the back for, you know, saving Jalil or whatever. When in fact, that everything that has really happened for Jalil is of Jalil's doing. Mm-hmm. And, you know, this spinal cord injury is devastating. And so I think if Jalil were going to be honest, if you were to ask Jalil, he'd be like, I mean, I'm okay, but like, I'm nowhere near where I need to be. I'm nowhere close to where I had hoped to be. And we really didn't do that much to get him to close to that. And that's the frustrating part of it. The most that we can sometimes hope to do, given our limited resources, is just try to help him keep his head above water. You know, I think a lot of people hear about, like, you know, all these agencies and everybody working together, and, you know, we've put him on a yacht. Well, no, we've basically thrown a life preserver, just enough to kind of keep him afloat. And he's doing, you know, he's having to do all this hard work just to stay above water. And I'd always, you know, I do my best to not lose sight of that. Because it's easy for us to get complacent and think, all right, well, we got him the basic things and good luck and best of luck to you. When, if we're really talking about trying to help him, there's got to be a higher standard. And unfortunately, as a state, as a city, we're just not meeting the standard. And Helen has written about this in the past. You know, she and David Gambacorta have written about what happens to these gunshot victims who suffer debilitating injuries and how easily we forget about them. And we do, we absolutely do. The numbers of individuals are staggering, and the needs that they have are incredible. And we have to be honest with ourselves. We're not doing enough for them.
And that story included people who had been shot and killed in cities like Philadelphia and Chicago, but it also included individuals who had been shot during mass shootings that we all sort of the world stops very briefly. Yeah. And then we all say, oh my God, this is horrible, we have to do better. And then we all sort of move on. And I think part of when David Gambacorta and I wrote that story about how few resources there are, and how folks have to navigate through this super bureaucratic sort of, a world to even get some of the most basic things, is that what we're not doing is that individuals like Jalil shouldn't luck out because he knows Scott and Melanie, right? It should be part of our healthcare system. This is a big enough reality in our world that the fact that it's not already cooked into our very faulty healthcare system is ridiculous. And so what it does is, no matter if I can sit here and go, yeah, I feel really good about, the results of Jalil's story and people cared or whatever. But the reality is that he's one person, right? And Scott's right. We helped a little, but we again get to go home and live our lives, and he's still trying to sort of rebuild his. He needs more help. Other people who are in his shoes need more help. And we're still sort of putting a Band-Aid over this gaping hole and going, no, we're good. Just be careful when you walk over the Band-Aid, because you're going to fall right over. It just doesn't make any sense. And honestly, I feel like we shouldn't be embarrassed that we're at this point in this city and within our country. We did okay by Jalil, but you know what? There's a whole bunch of other Jalils out there that we're not doing okay by.
And I would argue that we didn't. And I'd argue we didn't really do okay by Jalil. I mean, it's like the bare minimum, and Jalil is a goddamn hero. I mean, that's the crazy part, is he's a hero. He stood up and did the right thing and took a bullet for that. And so just to
but even if he didn't, he deserves
he
that
deserves
care.
right. But like think if we're this negligent or neglectful when it comes to somebody who's done so much good and did something so valiant, what is it for just the standard guy who gets shot walking home from work or what, and it shouldn't be that way. And one interesting thing, and I want to give time for questions, but the way that Helen ended up coming to this story was really, me trying to think outside the box. I don't even think Jalil knew who I was. It didn't matter, but I was aware of the struggles that he had gone through and was just frustrated by the fact that one minute we're calling him a national, or at least a local hero, but none of those people who read that article were aware of what he was going through now. The city, I didn't feel had recognized him in the way that was appropriate or that he was due. But I also cannot reach out to Helen and say, hey, here's a number for Jalil Frazier, call him, or or whatever. But I did make her aware that there is a story out there that you would probably be interested in. That's it. And I can tell you that there's an agency that's working with a very heroic person that is featured in this story. And that was it. And she, being Helen, reached out to Melanie and did her dogged determination thing and showed up on Jalil's front porch. And then, it was one of those things where she wrote this great article and I, tweeted the article out and said, this is a hero we've forgotten about. And it just so happened that Jake Tapper saw the tweet, quote tweeted it, and then it took off. That was it. But think about the randomness, how arbitrary and just how random that is. Because had Jake Tapper not seen it, had I not had Helen at my, a phone call away, none of that would happen. It absolutely should not be left to that kind of whim. It's frustrating.
And I just, before we move on to the next question, I just want to make a process comment to our students who are listening. This last 5 minutes has had gem after gem after gem of important real world implications of how we think about public health embedded in that we're talking about issues of inequity, that we're talking about issues of that when in the American healthcare system where people suffer a catastrophic event, that we do not have a system set up to appropriately take care of them in the short term and certainly not in the long term. But then also what Helen and Scott both just said about how frustrating and heartbreaking it can be that, I think for those of us who go into a helping profession, regardless of how we define that, we do it because we want to make the world a better place. We want to help people around us in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our cities. And we realize that oftentimes the systems, our own limitations, let alone the systems, prevent us from being able to do that. And that doesn't mean that we should give up the fight, but that means that we have to figure out how to work within the system to do what we can to help, and to also advocate and fight for a better day, to hope that we get to a point where maybe we change the healthcare system such that there are lifelong resources for not only, for all victims of gun violence and not just the ones who happen to have the, gold deluxe insurance plan attached to their name. And so for the students who are listening, I hope you appreciate how much great information was just in those last 5 minutes of this conversation. So Scott, I'm going to turn back to you and take us in a slightly different direction. We're getting a number of questions about more generally about gun violence in the city. And I know we've been talking more about victims and advocacy, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't touch on that as well. It has been said that gun violence has increased during the pandemic. Do you, and Helen and Melanie obviously chime in here as well, do you all feel like you have a sense of why that is and why we've seen the increase over the last 15 months?
Yeah, so I'll give my opinion for what it's worth. It's just an opinion. I think that this has been a perfect storm of variables that have played out.
when you look at where COVID has hit the hardest, it's happening in neighborhoods that are, disenfranchised, disadvantaged, that have struggled for a very long time. The virus itself has laid bare some of the inequality that lives there, particularly when it comes to economic inequality. The fact that so many of the frontline workers are living in these disadvantaged communities. The fact that the lack of access to healthcare is in these communities. When somebody in the Black and brown communities dies, they tend to be older, and it destabilizes not just the household, but it destabilizes the community. So you have a lot of folks who I think have lost aunts and mothers and fathers who help, hold those homes together. And, you have that going on. And on top of it, you have a sense of fear and kind of global anxiety and hopelessness that is come about as a result of this virus. You have the trauma and the stress of losing loved ones. The job loss, the fact that you have so many jobs that went away, and particularly when we're talking about, when we look at mass incarceration, the numbers of folks who are coming home, they're coming home to an environment where there just isn't work that had been there, because those kinds of jobs that would have been able to employ them have closed, and they're going to do whatever they can to keep the lights on. And so you have a lot of folks doing things that they probably don't want to have to do to keep things going on. And unfortunately, when we talk about things like drug dealing, or we just talk about any of it, whether it's just the mere stress of living in an urban environment where there's been violence in the past and the uncertainty of what's to come, gun violence tends to rage. And exacerbating this problem is the fact that stimulus money flowed in, and people made some real practical decisions. And I have to say, I probably would have made the same thing, which is I can use this money and I can buy product. I can also buy firearms. We know that whether you lived in Montana or Idaho or North Philly, you bought guns. And so we have this kind of influx of guns. And when you have more guns on the street, more people carrying guns, because you don't want to be the individual who's bringing a fist to a gunfight. Now you've got a lot of gun carrying going on, and these conflicts are flaring, and everybody's got guns. And so I think it's not one thing, it's a lot of things. And yes, we can look at the numbers. We know for a fact that violence increased by, I think the number is somewhere around 56% just last year alone, coming on the heels of a very bad year. And this year, if I'm not mistaken, violence is probably up, when we talk about shootings, is probably up around 39% as we are in the city right now. And one of the things that I would be remiss if I didn't point out, and I do this as often as I can, is the number of women who are being shot now is unbelievable. Not so long ago, probably just about 8 years ago, women represented about 7% of shooting victims. Today, they're about 13% of shooting victims. The number has increased by, I believe, about 76% just over 2019. So we are, it's all bad. And, this isn't our imagination. There are just a lot of people being shot. On average at Temple, we might see somewhere between 500 and 550 shooting victims in a bad year. In 2020, we saw 757 shooting victims come through our emergency room door. So it's a very real thing.
So Scott, going back to the comment you made a moment ago about women and the larger percentage of women being shot, do we know if it's directly related to domestic violence, or is it also just more random acts as well?
So it does not look like, there's not, certainly there's more domestic violence than there has been in the past, certainly during the pandemic, but there's just more violence of every kind now. Yeah. But what has been consistent is where women are being shot. So overwhelmingly, women are being shot in the neighborhoods, in the streets, not inside the homes. But to be quite honest, if in terms of like asking for theories as to what's happening or what's changing, I would love to hear Jalil's thoughts too. I think one of the things that I'm very aware of is the fact that I'm a layer removed from this. you know, and Jalil may have some insights. Or not. Jalil may just stare at me. He can keep staring at me if he wants.
But I don't know. I just feel like we all can talk, like, and we can try. I just feel like not enough action. Like we all can have this conversation right now, tomorrow, and every day. And the reality is, it's not enough of us. It's not enough people that can make this happen. Like there's really real people out here suffering. We can't stop this. We can't control this. We can't get everybody on board. So we can have this conversation, and then tomorrow we're gonna go right to the same task that's going on already. Like, it's crazy. Like, I could tell y'all my story. This is hard. It's hard. I can have this conversation. I could tell y'all how I'm suffering. I could tell y'all what I need, what I don't got. And then tomorrow come, it's gonna be the same because it's not enough people, you know, it's not enough it's sources, but then you gotta go through the process. And by the time you wait for the process, you didn't change your mind, you didn't figure out how to move on in your own self. You didn't got injured, then you're in a hospital. Like, it's not enough people that realize what's going on out here. And people getting shot every day. So when I talk, I never really talk about me. I talk about everybody else. Not everybody is strong to figure this out. So I don't talk like help me. I talk like help everybody. I could be the last person to help. Because honestly, if I was in a barbershop again, I probably would do the same thing again. So it's like we would be going right through the same situation all over again. Mm-hmm. So it was like, oh, help me. No, it's like, help me help everybody. Or like, somebody help us help everybody. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than everybody. Like, I suffer every single day. But I try not to complain about it because the more I complain, the less time the more time I take away from learning. Mm-hmm. I'm not gonna learn this situation if I'm just sitting around moping, complaining, waiting for somebody to do something for me. That's not gonna help me get nowhere. So every single day I try to do something. I'm not gonna lie. I'll probably be in the hospital like 2 times a month. I'm not gonna lie. Mm-hmm. But I tell them, like, I gotta figure this out. Like, I'm not waiting around no more for nobody help. You wait around, you gotta wait for somebody to get you outside. You gotta wait for somebody to help you with your little bathroom issue or whatever you got. You always gonna need help if you like this. You can sit around and wait for them, or you're gonna figure it out yourself. Mm-hmm. And the bigger problem is living and all that. That's a big problem. You really can't change people's housing settings. Like, most of us, we renting. So everybody not gonna agree to, oh, you could put this in your house, but it's not my house. So y'all helping me help them get a better value for their house. Y'all not building my house, y'all building somebody else's house. So that's a big problem too. That's why they don't want to waste the money on other people's properties. They don't know how long you're gonna be there. So it's like, when you really narrow it down, this is major. Mm-hmm. And I'm not gonna lie, I do a lot of researching. I'll be trying to figure this out. I got a book, I'll take notes and everything. But the biggest issue is getting comfortable. You're not gonna never be comfortable if where you live, you're not comfortable at. If you have to live somewhere that you have to figure this out every single day, you're never gonna be comfortable in your situation. Mm-hmm. There's days my neighbor be like, what the hell? Because he see me climbing out the house. I be telling him, like, you gonna put me on your back? Like, it's a real issue, but it's a known issue already. You know what I mean? So you're not gonna sit around and keep waiting. You gotta figure it out. Yeah. People getting shot every day. Y'all cannot save everybody. but y'all would try. You would try, but it's happening every single day.
Yeah.
Every single day is going to be somebody just like me, and you're going to be like, damn, how are we going to figure this out?
Well, Jalil, this is why I think it's so important that you're on our panel today, because I think you're absolutely right. We can all talk about these things at a very high level, but it's impossible for all of us, even Scott and Melanie and Helen, who have far more experience in this issue than I do, to really understand the challenges that come with being a gun violence survivor day in and day out the way that you do. And I think that's it's such a great learning opportunity for our students within the college who oftentimes they can learn from us from a book, and we can talk to them about theories, and we can talk to them about social determinants of health and inequities. But I think to actually hear the story of somebody who's lived through the experience and is living through the experience is such an incredibly important and unique learning opportunity. So I'm so very thrilled that you've been willing to share your experience with all of us in the time that we've had today, which has been great. So in a little bit of time we have left, we've got a couple of other interesting questions that have come in. Scott and Melanie, we've talked a lot about and gotten a good sense of what it's like to work with the individual who's been shot. Can you tell us a little bit about how you do crisis intervention work with family members, both that are maybe of a similar age to the victim, but also if there are young children involved, what types of interventions and supports do you provide for families with children?
So we offer free therapy to family members and to the children. And I would refer to the Center for Grieving Children, even though my therapist can provide therapy for children. But I like the Center for Grieving Children, and I like their program, and it's around children, and they have group sessions. So I refer the children to them, but I have a therapist in-house. All services are free. So just like for Jalil, for his wife, we offer for Jalil, the wife, the children, because we understand that the gun violence affects not only the victim, it affects their whole entire family. So we try to offer those free therapy services to everyone who's directly involved with the victim. And if it's a homicide family, we do it with the family members. And just to give you a little bit, there was a young man who was shot and killed on Page Street in North Philadelphia. Just so happens that there was a documentary being shot on gun violence in the city of Philadelphia. So we have these two mothers who have lost children to gun violence. They were interviewing them. So we have the young lady that's putting the documentary together. We have the cameraman and then the cameraman's assistant. Took them 2 hours to set everything up. The cameraman's assistant goes outside to get something. He shot multiple times and killed.
Right.
So not only will we offer services to his family, but I've already reached out to the two mothers. I've reached out to the young lady putting the documentary together, and I reached out to the cameraman, and we're going to offer free services to them as well, because when they came out of the house, they saw him laying there, shot in the head, the neck, and throughout his body.
Can I just jump in here for a second? Because what she's describing reminds me of something that just happened last week. I happened to be on a virtual gun violence hearing, one of the many that we have in this city, the usefulness that I've written about or unusefulness that I've written about. And while we're on the call, there's a young man who has, held a gun, who has shot somebody, who's been to prison, who sort of has lived this life, gets a call about his brother who was shot as he's on this call talking about gun violence. And it sort of goes back to Jalil's point, and I think there's this obviously benefit to having these conversations and pointing out what's missing and what we need to do more of. But, oftentimes we're leaning really hard on that talking and not doing enough sort of acting, not doing enough, there's just not enough action. And that's incredibly frustrating for us, but imagine how frustrating it is for the folks who actually need it, and who, to go back to healthcare, the only healthcare they can actually turn to is something like a GoFundMe page, because that's what passes for healthcare in this country, especially for individuals who find themselves in this situation. So I just needed to jump in because your story reminded me of sitting there, and you could see this young man's face kind of just, something happened, and then his voice is just sort of shaking, and everyone just stood there. I mean, we're talking about council members, I'm a newspaper columnist. There were other public officials with, lots of long titles, and we're sitting there, and the reality that hit me is like, oh my God, we have no idea what we're doing.
Right.
Helen, I actually think you did a really great job of communicating that emotion, because I did read that article of yours over the weekend, and I was, the word that came to mind was sobering. I had the same reaction, was how cruelly ironic and sickeningly ironic in some ways that's happening live as you're on that call to address the issue.
Yeah.
So as we get near the top of the hour, Melanie and Scott and Jalil, I have one last question for all of you. So oftentimes, if we do this right, and I think we certainly did tonight, our students are oftentimes inspired and eager to get involved. So are there opportunities with your respective agencies for ambitious undergraduate students to volunteer or go through training programs or begin to work in this space as they begin to, pursue their college degrees?
Northwest Victim Services is always looking for volunteers, and I have college interns. We're actually in the Criminal Justice Center. Now, mind you, this is pre-COVID. So we actually go to court with our victims as well. So we are always looking for volunteers. You can contact me directly at 267 808 0350. And my email address, I'll put in the chat because it's kind of long, but Northwest Victim Services always welcomes interns and volunteers, because we need all the help that we can get, and you will directly work with victims, witnesses, and community members affected by crime.
So I want everybody to know that Melanie did not know I was going to ask that question, but note how prepared she was with her telephone number and her email address to recruit volunteers. And Melanie, I'm more than happy to also spread the word throughout the college. Luisa is also a whiz with communication. So if anybody missed any of that or misses it in the chat, we certainly can connect people. And then Scott, how about in the hospital? Are there opportunities for our students to come up and learn how to do some of the advocacy work that your group does?
So right now, I'd be lying if I said, like Melanie, send them all to me, but just because we're barely keeping up with what we have going on, and sometimes it's difficult to kind of manage volunteers. It's difficult. But one thing that I'm going to point out that's somewhat related is the fact that this grant that allowed us to start this program will actually run out on October 1st. And, this is, again, we had this wonderful seed money that came from the federal government that allowed us to start this. But the truth is that there isn't, the Victim of Crime Act funds have dwindled to the point where Pennsylvania is not getting that kind of support anymore. And we may very well not have a program that is able to do this kind of support, offer this kind of support to families come October. So, if you have anybody out there who's a great grant writer and wants to support this work, this would be great. But we may ultimately have to reevaluate the model as we go forward in the going forward in the coming months, and it may be volunteer driven. So please check back with us at a future time.
I just thought about something. That's a great idea.
Yeah,
that's excellent. I know Ian and Rose and everybody else don't be happy, but we're going to do it now. But that's an excellent idea. 24 hours, 7 days a week. I love it.
So with that, I want to thank Jalil Frazier. Jalil, it's been a pleasure to get to know you. I was hoping actually we could come back and learn a little bit more about your trip to the gym this afternoon, but I was thrilled that I had an opportunity to learn a little bit about that before we went live. Scott Charles, again, Scott, thank you so very much for joining us over the last couple months as we plan this and put this together. you know, if you remember our first phone call, I was thinking one way with this, and you said, you know what, there's a great local story to tell, and you were absolutely positively right. And I think for our community and how within the college we value our community partnerships, I think this hit a beautiful tone. Melanie Nelson, you know, you do absolutely fantastic work. I'm so thrilled to have an opportunity to learn about it and get to know you just a little bit tonight. And again, I swear we didn't practice that, but I'm more than happy to share your email and your phone with people.
You can, and email and work cell. Anybody can have it.
And Helen Ubiñas from the Philadelphia Inquirer, again, I did see that story over the weekend. It was very, very moving. But you know, thank you for joining us, for sharing your perspective on how you approach this and communicate this, and the work that all of you do. So again, on behalf of the entire National Public Health Week Committee, thank you all so very much for joining us. And I look forward in the days to come sharing you with some feedback that we've gotten from our students. So thank you all very much, and good night.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.